Imagine a single company so powerful it could wage war, command armies, and shape the destinies of nations. This was no science fiction. It was the East India Company, arguably the most powerful corporation the world has ever known. At its peak, the East India Company fielded an army larger than that of Great Britain. It redrew the maps of Asia, influenced the balance of global power, and helped lay the foundations for modern capitalism and globalization. But how did a private company manage to eclipse entire governments in strength, influence, and ambition? The story of the East India Company begins in the late 16th century, during the golden age of exploration. One of England's most celebrated adventurers, Sir Francis Drake, returned home in 1580 after a 3-year circumnavigation of the globe. His ship was laden with spices from the so-called Spice Islands of the East Indies, a cargo so exotic and valuable that it sparked the imagination of English merchants and investors alike. At the time, Europe had an insatiable appetite for spices such as cloves, nutmeg, pepper, and cinnamon. These were not just culinary delights, they were symbols of wealth, power, and international prestige. Recognizing the lucrative potential of trade with the East, a group of wealthy London merchants and explorers petitioned Queen Elizabeth I for exclusive trading rights in the region. In 1600, she granted them a royal charter, creating the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies, more commonly known as the East India Company. This document gave the East India Company a monopoly over all English trade in the East Indies and endowed it with extraordinary powers, including the right to wage war, establish colonies, and administer justice. In effect, the East India Company was a private enterprise with the rights of a sovereign nation. An arrangement that would have far-reaching consequences. The company wasted no time putting its charter to work. In 1601, under the command of the seasoned privateer Sir James Lancaster, the company launched its first voyage aboard a ship called the Red Dragon. Lancaster established 2 early trading posts, one in Indonesia and another in the Spice Islands. But the fledgling enterprise quickly ran into trouble. The Dutch East India Company and Portuguese traders had already established deep roots in the region and weren't about to give up their dominance without a fight. Tension soon flared. English ships clashed with Portuguese galleons and Dutch frigates. While the East India Company's goal was profit, it increasingly relied on armed conflict to secure its interests. This was not merely economic competition, it was warfare under the guise of commerce. A defining moment came in 1612 at the Battle of Swaley, off the coast of India. Despite being outnumbered, a small East India Company fleet dealt a decisive blow to Portuguese naval forces. The victory opened the door to further expansion, and the company's focus began shifting from the East Indies to the Indian subcontinent itself. India, then under the control of the powerful Mughal Empire, was the crown jewel of Asia. Its cities were among the largest and wealthiest in the world, described by travelers as megacities of their time. Recognizing an opportunity, the East India Company sought alliances with local rulers and courted the Mughal court. The Mughals, intrigued by the company's European goods and naval firepower, granted the EIC trading rights and allowed them to build factories, not industrial plants in the modern sense, but fortified trading posts. These small outposts eventually grew into sprawling complexes, some of which housed hundreds of workers and generated immense wealth. As the company's footprint in India grew, so too did its need for protection. By the early 18th century, the East India Company had established private armies across 3 key regions, known as the Presidencies, Bengal, Bombay, and Madras. Though many of its soldiers were recruited locally, their training, leadership, and weaponry were distinctly European. These forces frequently outmaneuvered and overwhelmed larger but less organized Indian armies. 2 battles in particular illustrate the company's military might. In 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, just 3,000 East India Company troops under Robert Clive defeated an Indian army of nearly 50,000. 7 years later, at the Battle of Buxar in 1764, 7,000 company troops triumphed over a coalition of 40,000 soldiers from Indian states. These victories effectively handed the East India Company control over much of northern India. Though India was its primary theatre, the East India Company's ambitions extended far beyond the subcontinent. The company established outposts and exerted influence throughout Asia, along the African coast, and even in Australia. It became a true multinational enterprise, linking diverse markets and cultures through trade. By the 18th and 19th centuries, fueled by the Industrial Revolution's demand for raw materials, the East India Company became one of the world's most formidable monopolies. Tea, cotton, silk, opium, and other commodities flowed across its trade networks. The company was not just a trading house. It was an empire, a forerunner of modern corporate globalization. As the East India Company grew richer, it also became notoriously corrupt. Company officials amassed vast fortunes through bribes, tax farming, and exploitation. The gap between public duty and private enrichment widened dangerously. Even back in Britain, politicians and citizens began to question whether such a powerful private enterprise should remain unchecked. Parliament stepped in with a series of laws designed to rein in the company. The India Act of 1784 established a board of control to oversee its political affairs. The Charter Acts of 1813 and 1833 further eroded the company's autonomy and opened up trade to competition. The final blow came in 1857 with the outbreak of the Sepoy Mutiny, also known as the Indian Rebellion. Sparked by religious and political grievances among Indian soldiers, the rebellion spread rapidly. Though eventually crushed, it exposed just how fragile the company's grip on power had become. A London news headline captured the crisis in stark terms. "Our house in India is on fire. We are not insured." In 1858, the British Crown officially dissolved the East India Company and assumed direct control over India. The corporation that once commanded armies and ruled territories was dismantled by the very government that had once empowered it. By the time of its final closure in 1874, the East India Company had left an indelible mark on the world. As the Times wrote on April 8, 1873, "It accomplished a work such as in the whole history of the human race no other trading company ever attempted, and such as none, surely, is likely to attempt in the years to come." The legacy of the East India Company is complex. It pioneered globalization and corporate governance, yet also exemplified the dangers of unchecked private power. Its story offers both a blueprint and a warning that corporations, if given too much leeway, can rival, and even surpass, the power of nations.